Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I enjoyed yesterday. I'm going to talk about parasitism, and I was very excited to see this as a theme in the conference. And I've long been interested in the French polymath Michel Serres, who wrote a book in 1981 called The Parasite, which was a big influence on me when I did my PhD in the early 90s. Serres is a kind of very interested in mathematics, has a strong background in mathematics, but has done histories of practically all the natural sciences and is very interested in thermodynamics and information theory and the new possibilities they offer to understanding our world. In 1989, not in 2019 rather, you see I'm in the wrong century, a wonderful film came out by Bong June-ho called The Parasite. 2019 was also the year that Michel Serres died. So what I want to do is to take you through quickly the heart of what I think Serres is arguing in The Parasite and illustrate it by way of The Parasite. So that's what I mean by from Michel Serres to Bong Ho. And the bit to the pandemic, I think I bit off more than I could chew, because I think I'm not really going to be able to get much there. But given that the conference is on that theme, I think hopefully I'll set up some resonances that will be relevant to people and we can discuss. Talking of biting off more than I can chew, parasitism is very much about eating. So parasiting is a way of eating. It derives from the word para and sitos meaning wheat or food, para on the side. So to parasite is to eat on the side. And what Michel Serres does is he articulates together three very different meanings of the word parasite, a biological, an anthropological, and an informational one. Starting with the biological one, in terms of life on Earth, crudely speaking, you can divide things up into producers and consumers. So if we start on the left here with this sort of enigmatic figure of the sun, which symbolizes energy, it doesn't just symbolize energy, it is energy. We can think of that as P0, production. The producers, which are the plants that photosynthesize, are called autotrophic because of the way in which they eat by converting solar energy into chemical energy. The consumers are animals who of course eat either plants or other animals. So they're in position P2, they're intercepting the relation that the producers adopt to production. So this arrow here is intercepting this relation. So the consumers are the heterotrophs. Now a parasite is defined by biologists as a heterotroph, but it's a distinctive type of heterotrophic eater. It eats in a way that's entirely dependent on its host. Often it actually lives in the body of the host. And so what Serres does is characterizes parasitism as a one-way relation, taking without giving, that intercepts another, if you like, flow of energy. So to parasite is to eat on the side. But Serres observes that actually this biological meaning of parasite, which of course is pretty important, is derivative from a secondary anthropological meaning of parasitism. There we are. He looks at the history of human culture, and mostly from the West, in fact, but he finds a constant theme in that culture is the dynamics of hosting, hospitality, hostility. And if anything, the biologist gives the name parasite to that particular type of animal because of this knowledge from this anthropological tradition. For example, if you take, Odysseus, who in one of Homer's famous stories clears his household from the parasites, if you like, that had begun to eat from his table and were looking to marry his wife when he was away. One text that Serres analyzes in detail is a fable called the City Rat and the Country Rat. And in this fable, the city rat invites a country rat to eat at the table of the farmer that of the house of which the city rat lives in. And Serres shows us that, in a sense, one can talk about production at P0 here. So this is a repeating of the parasitical cascade I showed earlier. Serres makes the point that the farmer is actually a tax farmer, And so the question of who is the parasite is sort of raised at every point, because the tax farmer, of course, makes a living from taxing the people who work the land, the other farmers. But the people who work the land are also in a relationship to plants and animals and so on and so forth. But what Serres shows is that, in a sense, the city rat parasites intercepts the relation of the tax farmer, eats at his table or eats the crumbs from his table. The city rat then invites his cousin, the country rat, to eat in turn at his. So the parasite, the country rat parasites the city rat, and so you have this sort of cascade of parasites that Serres drawing our attention to, a parasite upon a parasite. And Serres invites us to view this as the formation of a system. So this is conversion of the potential energy in the sun into other forms of energy that's generating the system that we call the natural world. The third meaning that Serres introduces of parasitism comes from information theory, and this is about noise that if you like, between a sender and a receiver, there's always a channel. But parasitism is an obscure, the parasites are using an obscure French meaning to mean the equivalent of static in English, a sort of noise that interrupts a signal. So in the fable of the city rat and the country rat, the rats are interrupted by a noise. They hear a knock at the door and they scurry away, they run away. And you can imagine a dynamic of the system. You hear some noise, the rats run away, and then gradually they come back. A little bit like, I think we were talking earlier about the Sistine Chapel, where people say, silenzio per favore, because the noise builds and builds and builds, and then silenzio per favore, people scurry away and then come back. So noise interrupts the system, but there's a dynamic of the system. But part of this story is also that, of course, the country rat cannot bear the noise of this system and says to his cousin, listen, I'm going back to the country, I can't eat like this. So in a sense, the city rat is immunized, vaccinated from the noise, is used to the noise. So the noise, if you like, disrupts the system, but the system is the noise. The city makes the noise, but the noise is the city, says Serres. So there's a interesting relationship between the noise and the system, constitutive. The parasite is constitutive of the system in this sense. So taking these three meanings, Serres gives us a fundamental definition of parasitism as what he calls the atomic relation, or the atom of the relation. Most of us now are interested in relational ontologies. Well, Serres is saying the atom of the relation is parasitism, and it's got two main features. It's one way, it takes without giving, right? It's not reciprocal, it's one directional. And it's always already, second feature, a relation upon a relation. It's the interception of a relation, as I'm trying to indicate with these arrows here. There's a relation between plant and sun. That relation of energy is intercepted by the animal that eats the plant. The energy is converted into a different thing. Here it's converted into, let's say, a cow. That's Serres' essential definition of parasitism as atomic relationship. So let's turn to the film, Bong June-ho's film, The Parasite. This is set in an unspecified South Korean city, and it tells the tragic story of three families. I'm sorry if those who haven't seen it may want to block your ears, because I might spoil the plot a little bit. The main focus is the Kim family, who we see here. They're poor, they're precariously employed, and they live in a squalid half basement. And the events of the film are mostly seen through the quite confused and distorted eyes of this chap Ki-woo, the son of the family. Ki-woo dreams of a better life, and this rock here is given to him by his friend Min as a symbol of his aim to better himself. And the rock in the end actually is what gives him brain damage, because he gets clubbed with it. So it's rather symbolic. They're looking for upward mobility, the Kings. And if you picture the opening scene of the movie, Ki-woo is sitting beneath a basement window, frustrated because there's no signal for his mobile phone. And it seems that the Kings have been parasiting the internet connection of their neighbor, who have probably password protected it. And his sister here, Ki-young, is basically suggesting some alternative passwords that might work, but they don't work. And then she flicks from the table a stink bug. The apartment is infested with stink bugs. The mother, meanwhile, is expecting a WhatsApp message about a job pizza package making that she's expecting. And so she's saying, quick, we need this signal, get this signal. And meanwhile, she kicks her husband, who's fallen asleep on the floor, says, get us a plan. We need a plan from this, right? We need a way of managing this. So Ki-woo holds his phone up high and searches the apartment for a new signal, and eventually finds one by climbing on the toilet. He intercepts the signal from a local cafe. So here we've already got illustrations of Serres' three types of parasitism. We've got an interrupted telecommunications signal, we've got a social relation of freeloading, and we've got these unwanted stink bugs that are in the apartment. But also, the whole family is seen as functioning as a parasitical cascade in the way that Serres would suggest. So at P1, we've got the signal coming from the coffee shop. At P2, we've got Ki-woo, the son, intercepting the signal with his mobile phone. At P3, we've got Ki-young, who benefits from that signal for her own reasons. We've got Chung-suk, who is the mum, who accesses WhatsApp through this signal. We've got the father, Ki-taek, who's sort of issuing instructions from below. So it literally, there's a scene in the film where the Ki-woo is the highest, the cascade goes down to the lowest. The father is issuing instructions from the floor. So one parasiting the other in a cascade. And then we get noise. What's the noise? Outside in the street, there's a fumigator going by because the whole neighborhood is infested with stink bugs. And the Kims look up startled at this noise. Shut the window, says Ki-jung. No, leave it open, says the father. We can get free extermination. So the viewer is invited to wonder here, who is the parasite being exterminated? Is it the stink bugs or is it the Kim family? So the next phase of the film deals with the main business, which is the parasitical relationship that the Kims gradually establish with a rich family called the Parks, who live high up on the hill in the town in a beautiful modern house. So each of the Kims gets their hooks into one of the Park family by somehow exploiting a soft spot, a weakness, something emotional. So if we locate the Parks in position P1, then their son, then the Kim's son Ki-woo occupies, sorry, I'll move that, occupies position P2 when he tricks himself into being the English language tutor of the daughter of the Parks. He then quickly lies about his sister being an art therapist and secures a job for Ki-young being art therapist for the Parks' son. Then together they engineer so that their father can become the driver of the Park family by engineering to have the previous driver sacked. And then finally, the same trick is used to employ as the housekeeper, the mother Chung-suk. So they make up a story and get the previous housekeeper called Moon Gwang sacked from her job. So by the end of this scene, the Parks find themselves employing the entire Kim family, but they don't know that it's the Kim family. So the Kim family, are, if you like, have parasited the Parks. So once again, a noise interrupts this system, troubles the cascade. Quite literally in a scene where the Kims have established themselves in the beautiful front room of the Park family. They're eating their food, they're drinking their booze, and they're having a nice conversation. They're joking about the fact that, in fact, Ki-woo has seduced the Park's daughter, and there's a possibility that they might get married. So they're talking about, fantasizing about that being related to the Park family, and they're talking about which of the rooms in the house would they like to occupy. And then there's a series of little noises that interrupt. First, there's a storm, a lightning strike that comes. And then after this lightning strike, the mother says to the father, well, if the Parks came home, you would scurry away like a cockroach, wouldn't you? And he gets furious at this and he smashes a lot of the crockery and the bottles. But then he says, oh, no, don't worry, I'm just playing. I'm just play acting. It's not real. And then the interruption happens. There's a ringing at the doorbell, an incessant ringing at the doorbell. And at the door is Moon Kwang, the former housekeeper, who has forgotten something. And she more or less forces her way into the house. And it turns out that what she's forgotten is, in fact, her husband is living in a basement underneath the Parks house that the Parks didn't even know existed. And so, of course, since she was sacked, she can't get to him, and he's in danger of starving. So she needs to get in to feed her husband. So this leads to the awareness on the part of the Kim family that there's a parasite already at play that's already parasited this family. And so there's a kind of battle between the two parasitical families that happens very quickly. A struggle where both of them strive to expose the other to the Parks. So, and there's a scene in which the housekeeper, Moon Kwang, is just about to send a text to the Parks to say, you know, this whole family is living in your house, did you know that? And she gets hit with a frying pan.
Sorry, Paul, just to let you know, if you can bring it to conclusion about 2-3 minutes, thanks.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, so basically, they disempower the other parasitical family and lock them in the basement. So you've basically got three levels. You've got the high level of the Parks, you've got the mid-level of the Kims in their basement looking up, and you've got the low level of Moon Kwang and her husband living in the basement and now trapped in the basement. You then get another crucial noise scene, which is a storm, a massive downpour that happens. And it's at this point that the film changes its direction, and one starts to ask the question, who is the parasite in this film? So you start to wonder if it's not the Parks who are actually the parasites, because the Parks are existing in complete oblivion to these two families that are, if you like, underneath them. And this all is made patent in this storm scene, because the water, as it goes down the hill, starts off beautifully clean above, and all it does is interrupt the camping trip of the Parks, and they worry whether they'll be able to have their lovely party. And yet it completely floods the basement flat of the Kims, and the water is filthy, and you know the water comes out of the toilet. You know, their life is entirely ruined by the flood, but it's just a slight inconvenience and looks beautiful from the Parks position. And there's various ways in which we show the obliviousness that the Parks family have towards the Kims and the Moon Kwang and so on. The film ends with a dramatic kind of double murder, which I won't tell you about because that will spoil the plot, and also it will give me an extra minute to come to my conclusion. But let's say the two murders involve the parasite killing the host in a certain way. Okay, I've tried to sort of give you a sense of a very quick sense of how the film can be related and explicated by means of the of Serres' book. I think it draws attention to the value of the concept of parasitism in terms of the three meanings of it, the atomic definition of it, and the idea that systems are formed out of parasitical cascades. So this gives us, in a sense, an interesting vision of nature that I think Serres has, which would qualify as, we were talking yesterday a little bit about the need for a sort of post-anthropocentric or anthropologico-centric vision of humanity as part of nature. This gives us a sort of way of thinking about, you know, a unity of nature in terms of this cascade of relations around energy. And it's also quite scientific, which some of you might not like, but I think it's kind of interesting and important to say. It calls into question our ways of living. It asks the question, who is the parasite? And it insists that that question of parasitism is a relative question. It also shows us the dynamics of an unjust system on the brink of sort of irreversible destruction. So all of the actors in this film, Parasite, become parasites, and it leads to a disastrous scene in the end. Secondly, the role of noise, interruption, crisis, environmental disaster. This is a way of relating to pandemic. Noise, in a sense, is synonymous with a liminal scenario in another way of thinking. So here we can think about, it's also interesting questions of the virus as a parasite, because even though viruses do not live, they are considered to be parasitical. So you've got an interesting liminal paradox, a non-living parasite. A virus is a non-living parasite. Third, further, and I'm very nearly finished, we see the whole film through the blurred eyes of Ki-woo's distorted vision. So it's a little bit like Hamlet. The whole of the play of Hamlet is through the distorted vision in some ways of Hamlet. And you get the impression at the end that only if only Hamlet had watched Hamlet, he would have understood the dynamics of his situation. And likewise, you'd think that if Ki-woo were able to watch the film Parasite, the film would give him, if you like, a better perception of the dynamics of what he's been through, because none of the characters know what's going on during the film. It's as if it's driven by a plot that none of them are aware of. And this parasitical dynamics gives you insight into that plot. And finally, if we grasp ourselves as parasites in this way, as we take the atomic relation to be, if we take the parasitical relation to be atomic, then the first step in actually understanding us, the first step of moving towards a more symbiotic relation, something like Serres articulates in A Natural Contract, is grasping ourselves as parasites. One can only become symbiotic if one moves beyond parasitism and starts to sort of hook that one-way relationship up into reciprocal relations. If we don't do that, the parasite destroys its host, the worldly world destroys the worldwide world, as Serres was put it. Nature asserts itself in the way that the flood asserts itself in this film, and we suffer a hard rain. I'll draw it to a conclusion there.
Thank you, Paul. We have two discussants, Eugene McNamee and Paul O'Connor. Who wants to go first?
I don't mind.
Okay.
This is Eugene. Paul, thank you very much for a wonderfully rich paper, and I'll keep my comments brief. I'll make one observation and then a couple of questions. So the observation is, I think you do a wonderful job of, by virtue of as much your presentation, the way you present, as also I've had the benefit of reading the written paper, of really illustrating how this question is continually asked, both by the viewer and within the film: who is the parasite, who is the parasite, who is the parasite? And so it gradually sinks in and illustrates this fact that it's the parasitical relation, it's the asking of that question continually that is the engine that drives the plot, that is always there. So that's reframes the whole issue of parasitism away from this notion of who's taking and not giving, and into that everyone's taking and not giving in some way, and that is creating social relations. And how do you kind of encounter that? And your answer at the end is to encounter that through a kind of search for symbiosis. And I suppose there is kind of a symbiotic relationship, perhaps, well, I'm being kind of slightly loose and generous there, between the film and the book. And so the question, I suppose, in relation to the film and the book is, because at least in your reading of the film absolutely perfectly illustrates the theoretical framework of Serres, I wonder to what degree it's your impression that the filmmaker was working using the concepts of Serres in order to create his kind of plot, because it is a film that certainly is highly plot driven and really ideas driven. It just bounces along from one idea to the next in incredibly rapid fashion. So that's one question. And the second question is in relation to Serres and his use of the term parasite. The first two terms, and by the way, I really liked your observation as well about the initial anthropological use of that term parasite, and then that being transferred into the realms of biology, which normally kind of commonsensically we would think of that the other way around, I think. But in relation, is being a bit opportunistic when he shoehorns in that third use of the term parasite or parasite as noise, or is he again tapping into a kind of well of insight that there's always a third relation upon the relation to the relation, and that is the capacity for disruption to that relation upon a relation?
Thanks, Eugene. Do I respond now? Is that the idea?
Yeah, if you choose so, yes, up to you, yeah.
Okay, those are very, very good questions. I think you're absolutely right. The thing is not to answer the question of who is the parasite, but to ask that question continually and to recognize that in a sense this is a shifting dynamic. I think in terms of the symbiosis of film and book, I've no evidence that Bong June-ho read The Parasite. I suspect he didn't read The Parasite, and yet there are sort of such clear resonances that it would be, you know, it would be interesting. One has to ask the question, if not, then why are there such clear resonances? An answer I'd be sort of inclined to at least raise as a hypothesis is because if these relations are as fundamental as Sarah is saying, then we would expect them to crop up in any sort of astute observation, just as he finds them cropping up in Aesop's fables or in a number of other sort of cases that he studies. To take the other question about the third meaning of parasitism from information theory, I actually think that is quite a deep insight, and it is important. And I think what he's doing in drawing attention to noise, one thing he's doing is he's drawing attention to, in a sense, the parasitical cascade is another way of thinking evolution. So we're talking about how does something like humanity evolve from the rest of nature? How do creatures who perceive, who communicate, evolve from creatures that are less able to communicate and perceive? So the emergence of information, the emergence of perception, of sense making is crucial to this. And I think, you know, you can also read this film in a Girardian way. You could read it through the question of desire. So this, I didn't go into the meaning of this stone, this desire stone that's given to the main character Ki-woo at the beginning of the story by his friend, who's a very successful person who's gone to university and who actually encourages Ki-woo to take up this job and encourages him to make the initial deceit of trying to get a job as the language tutor to the daughter of the Parks, and there's clearly a mimetic relation of rivalry going on between Ki-woo and his friend, and the whole plot is driven by this sort of Girardian idea, and you can see the mimetic rivalries and the escalation of violence very much in Girardian terms. And then you'd have to ask the question: did the film director read Girard as well? And probably no. Again, probably the reason that the film exemplifies Girardian dynamics so well is because those dynamics are pretty fundamental. And then the question is, how do you relate the Girardian dynamics to the Serres dynamics? And that's where I would sort of think about the third meaning of parasitism around communication theory as accommodating into the picture. Serres is first of all interested in energy dynamics, but out of energy comes information, comes communication. So it's a way of bringing that into the scope of an understanding of nature. That's probably, I probably babbled too much, so but that's what I would say on that.
Okay, thank you. Paul, you're next.
Okay, thanks, Paul. That was extremely interesting. I think a particularly lucid presentation of Serres' ideas, and especially through the film. The kind of question that was coming to my mind as you were talking was, are there particular circumstances in which parasitism kind of metasizes in a given society? So obviously it's always an element of any society, just as in nature we always have viruses and parasites, and then suddenly they can explode at some time, and you have a pandemic. And likewise in a society. So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of took from your paper and also from the presentation, you know, where you have relationships where on the one hand, there is this overabundance and beside it, a high level of inequality. So in ancient Rome, a parasite was somebody who kind of made a career or a living out of cadging dinners from rich people who, you know, just wanted dinner companions sitting around with them for dinner. And of course, that was in context of an exceptionally wealthy aristocracy and this underemployed kind of semi-proletarianized population. You see again in the film that you're discussing, you know, the wealthy family and then this precarious family that find a way of latching onto them. And I wonder, if, you know, I loved your diagrams of the parasitical cascade in different cases. I wonder if you were to create a meta diagram for our own society, how many real producers would we find in a post-industrial consumerist society? Probably most of them wouldn't be in the West, they'd be in other parts of the planet. And how many people intercepting different food chains and building, you know, David Graeber talks about bullshit jobs. So many people in our society are doing bullshit jobs that aren't particularly producing anything or in any way meaningful. So it's almost, probably you could imagine it as a pyramid scheme of parasitism. So that was the one question that kind of came across my mind. What are the circumstances under which parasitism metasizes in a given society. And the other one was about the relation between, I suppose in Serres' terms, the anthropological and the biological dimensions of parasitism. Because towards the end, you're talking particularly in terms of our relationship to the environment and the planet. Sorry, apologies, the children are home today. It's weekend here in the UAE is Friday and Saturday, so the children are just running up and down the stairs. So apologies for that's it. That's the parasitical interference in communication. I think the country rat. I'd be scampering off here now. But no, like I say, I think obviously, I think in terms of the human relationship with the planet, the parasitism is largely negative, where other species are being driven to extinction. The entire biosphere is being threatened, and plainly the need to change that into something more symbiotic is very obvious. In human relationships, obviously, again, parasitism can be extremely disruptive, but where you have a situation of some people having superabundance and others having very little, is parasitism certainly a necessary strategy for survival, and it cannot even be functional in a way of redistributing resources. So is the biological and the anthropological level, does that parallel fit neatly, or is there differences between them? So I say those were the two kind of observations, questions that came to me through reading your paper and through watching the very interesting presentation.
Paul, as short as possible, if possible, because we kind of went over the time already. Thanks.
So just a quick response.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, if possible. Yeah.
A quick response would be I think those are really good points. I would love to draw that bigger diagram. I didn't get a chance to do it for this. I think the point that you made about the Roman situation is really relevant. Of course, the idea of the parasite who would be invited to the host table would repay with stories. So this is the thing that Serres draws attention to, that in a sense we sing for our supper. So there's an energy conversion that goes on. So we academics sing for our supper. We come up with ideas, with words, with hot air, if you like. And that hot air, you can't eat it, right? So the producer is going to see this is not energy. And yet, of course, in our society, we need that hot air. So professionals, when professionalization happened in the 19th century, all of the professions needed a layer of self-produced hot air, if you like. If you're a medic, you need to train as a medic, and you need to update that knowledge base that becomes that of a medic. Or if you're a lawyer, you train as a lawyer. Or if you're every job became overlaid with a parasitical level of, if you like, ideas. But those ideas are good things, in the sense, or they can be good things. So the point of metastasis that you're rightly, I think, drawing attention to is at what point does a transformation occur whereby, if you like, the abstraction from a substratum that gives you another layer of functioning starts to interfere and cause problems rather than actually be something that's helpful in that situation. And that metastatic problem occurs in the film, the way it's thematized by Bong June-ho, is when there is, if you like, an isolation of the different subsystem types, when there's no communication possible between the Parks and the Kims, for example, when communication is deliberately blocked. And what that does is it allows noise to develop in the environment that the systems are just not aware of. Right, and so the systems start to become, if you like, carcinogenic when they're not in a relationship of free flow with the other systems that are there. So I think there's something about, if you like, the parasitical relationship will always reassert itself when it needs to, because it becomes a matter of survival, but under better sort of coordinated conditions, multiple levels are able to occur. So one just very quick thing about the relationship between anthropological and biological, you see it in a human being. Each of us, if you like, are an animal, but we're parasited by a mind. So our mind is the parasite of our body. The mind isn't the brain, it's parasites the brain. It takes what the brain does, what's poured into the brain, and it produces another level of systemic functioning. And likewise, our societies work by communication. Communication takes the consciousness that's produced in our brain and converts it into a different medium, communication. So in a sense, the strata are all there, and we can start to see how they function. But there is a unity to it. There is, if you like, a systemic unity that I think people like Serres are smart enough to draw attention to. Yeah, I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much.